Hello again and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at anaerobic respiration. We're going to start off with a recap of what anaerobic respiration is. Then we're going to talk about the effects of exercise on the body and why those effects are required. We're going to look at the equations of anaerobic respiration in animals as well as plants and yeast. We're going to look at how anaerobic respiration is less efficient than aerobic respiration and why that's the case. We're also going to look at the long-term benefits of exercise and why fitter people are better able to cope with greater levels of activity. We will then move on to what muscle fatigue is and how it is linked to lactic acid. And then finally, we'll look at the concept of oxygen debt. So let's dive in. So, anaerobic respiration. Basically, anaerobic respiration is the release of energy from breaking down complex molecules without using oxygen. We'll talk about why that's desirable, but we'll also talk about why your cells try to avoid anaerobic respiration as well. So next bit, during periods of intense exercise or activity, what effects are seen within the body in response and why are they necessary? So how does your body respond to higher activity and why is it necessary? So starting off with an increased heart rate. You increase your heart rate in order to supply oxygen and glucose to your muscles faster. It also has the benefit of draining your muscles of carbon dioxide and water vapor, which are the waste products of respiration. We also end up with an increased breathing rate. Why is that necessary? An increased breathing rate increases the ventilation of your lungs, which means that you can end up absorbing oxygen faster and removing carbon dioxide and water vapor faster. This has the net effect of making it possible for you to carry out respiration faster. So those are the effects in the short term of exercise. The next bit. Are these responses always enough in order for the body to cope with the extra demands? And how does the body deal with this problem? In essence, the answer is no. If you are carrying out intense exercise, you will eventually hit a point where you're supplying oxygen as fast as you can, and you can't possibly supply the oxygen any faster. You can't breathe any faster. Your heart can't beat any faster than it already is. At that point, your body then switches partially to anaerobic respiration in order to supplement the aerobic respiration, which is happening at its maximum rate. So let's have a look at the equations for anaerobic respiration in animals and in plants and yeast. So we'll start off with animals. You have glucose going to lactic acid. As you can see, the equation or the formula for glucose is C6H12O6. We've come across that before when we did respiration. In order to balance the equation, you simply put a 2 in front of the lactic acid because its equation is C3H6O3. So that 2 multiplies the numbers for each of the elements within lactic acid. So 2 multiplied by the 3 for carbon gives you 6, which is now balanced with the left-hand side. 2 multiplied by 6 atoms of hydrogen gives you 12, which is now balanced with the left-hand side. And 2 multiplied by 3 oxygen atoms now gives you 6, which is now balanced on the left-hand side or with the left-hand side. Now we go on to plants and yeast. In plants and yeast, the breakdown of glucose in respiration leads to the production of ethanol and carbon dioxide, we'll talk about why carbon dioxide is released when we look at the formula equation. So in the formula equation, you've got the formula of glucose, which is C6H12O6. And when it's broken down during anaerobic respiration, you end up with ethanol, which is C2H5OH, and carbon dioxide, which is CO2. So in order to balance that, you put a 2 in front of the ethanol and a 2 in front of the carbon dioxide. Let's see why. On the left-hand side of the equation, you've got 6 carbon atoms. What do you have to do with the right-hand side in order to balance it? So you've got 2 multiplied by the carbons, the 2 carbons in ethanol, which will give you 4, and then 2 multiplied by the 1 carbon in carbon dioxide, which will give you another 2, and that's balanced now on both sides because you've got 4 plus 2 on the right-hand side, which is 6, and you've got 6 on the left-hand side, so that's balanced. Let's look at the hydrogen atoms on the right-hand side. In ethanol, you've got the 5 initial hydrogens and then the hydrogen from the hydroxyl group. That's 6 in total. When you multiply that by 2, 6 multiplied by 2, you end up with 12. And that's balanced with the number of hydrogen atoms on the left-hand side. Now let's look at the number of oxygen atoms on the right-hand side. You've got 2 multiplied by the 1 oxygen in ethanol, that gives you 2, plus 2 multiplied by the 2 oxygens in carbon dioxide, that gives you another 4. 4 plus 2 gives you 6, and that's balanced now with the 6 oxygens on the left-hand side. So that's how you balance those equations. And that is also why you end up with carbon dioxide, because the ethanol leaves a shortfall of some of the elements involved, and so you end up with carbon dioxide. So let's have a look on the next page. So from the equations for anaerobic respiration, could you suggest why it releases less energy than aerobic respiration? And if you look at the equations, you can see that in animals, for instance, you would end up with glucose being broken down completely into carbon dioxide and water during aerobic respiration. But here, you've only broken down a small number of bonds to end up with a molecule that seems to be about half the size of glucose. And as such, you're going to release less energy because fewer bonds have been broken. So that's the reason why anaerobic respiration is less efficient. There are fewer bonds broken, and because there are fewer bonds broken per molecule of glucose, you end up with less energy being released. So let's think about what the main difference is between someone like an athlete like Usain Bolt and a fairly unfit person such as myself or the person in the picture. So if we have a look there, Usain Bolt is much fitter, and that's because he has greater stamina. But what brings that stamina about? So let's think about the next stage, which is what happens if you carry on doing intense exercise. You end up with something called muscle fatigue. What is muscle fatigue? Muscle fatigue occurs when lactic acid builds up in the muscles and the muscles can't contract as quickly. You end up sometimes with a cramp. And the reason why is because the lactic acid builds up in between the muscle fibers and the muscle can't contract as quickly. So how does your body deal with that problem? It deals with the problem by getting rid of the lactic acid. If lactic acid is a problem, then getting rid of it will solve it. So you need to break down the lactic acid, basically clear it out of the muscles, and then you end up with the muscle fatigue being solved. So why is it that fitter people, like athletes, are better able to cope with intense exercise with that build-up, possibly, of lactic acid? One or a couple of the reasons would be because fitter people have a greater cardiac output. Your cardiac output is how much blood your heart can pump out of it with each beat. With very fit people, their hearts can basically pump blood or greater quantities of blood with fewer beats than an unfit person. The net effect of that is that oxygen and glucose can be supplied to the muscles faster in fitter people. In fitter people, their lung capacities are also greater. Why is that helpful? A greater lung capacity means that their bodies can take in oxygen from the air faster and remove carbon dioxide and water vapor faster. The net effect of that is that their muscles have a greater supply of oxygen and are better able to use aerobic respiration rather than anaerobic respiration. And even if they do build up lactic acid, they're then better able to break it down faster because oxygen is required to break down lactic acid. So that's two of the long-term effects of regular exercise for fitter people. So the next bit, after a period of exercise, you don't just go back immediately to your normal breathing and heart rates. We've all done a bit of a run or a swim or something like that, which then causes our heart rates and our breathing rates to increase. But actually, they remain elevated for a little while after the exercise. The fitter you are, the less time you will have to spend with that elevated heart rate and breathing rate. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's really to do with what I said earlier. In fitter people, they have a higher cardiac output and a greater lung capacity, both of which mean that they can actually supply oxygen faster as well as glucose and get rid of carbon dioxide and water faster. It also has the net effect of reducing the lactic acid buildup. So just after very intense exercise, what is the breathing rate like and why? And I've already said that your breathing rate increases, and that's to supply oxygen faster and get rid of CO2 and water faster. With reference to the information above, describe what oxygen debt is. So oxygen debt is that extra oxygen you need to take in after a period of exercise in order to get rid of the lactic acid. And that's why you continue to breathe faster and your heart continues to beat a little bit faster after exercise, because you still need a little bit more oxygen to get rid of the lactic acid that built up during the period of intense exercise. So let's have a look at this graph, which illustrates the difference between fit and unfit people. So I'll give you a few seconds to just have a look at that graph and see if you can identify two differences between fit and unfit people. You can pause it to think about it. Now, looking at the graph, you can see, first of all, that unfit people have a higher pulse rate or a higher heart rate than fit people. The reason why is because fit people have a greater cardiac output. As such, they only need a lower heart rate to do the exact same amount of work, transporting oxygen and glucose and removing CO2 and water, compared to unfit people. So fit people can do the same level of activity on a smaller number of heartbeats. Also, as you move further down the graph, you can see that the recovery time is greatly reduced. In fact, it's about half the time for a fit person. This is also to do with the fact that fitter people have a greater cardiac output and a greater lung capacity, both of which mean that it takes less time for them to pay off their oxygen debt. It takes less time for them to take in the extra oxygen they need to get rid of the accumulated lactic acid. So on the whole, fitter people are going to end up being healthier and more efficient than unfit people. So let's have a look at the last question. So describe and explain the benefits shown on the graph above. So fitter people have lower heart rates, so more efficient hearts, which means that they can actually supply oxygen and glucose faster than unfit people can, and they can get rid of carbon dioxide and water vapor faster. Fitter people have a lower recovery time. That means that it takes less time, as I said earlier, for them to take in the extra oxygen required after a period of exercise in order to clear out whatever lactic acid they built up. And remember, in a fitter person, they'd have built up less lactic acid than an unfit person in the first place. Okay, so that is it on anaerobic respiration. As is usually the case with all of these videos, it will help if you watch this video a few more times so that the material is more likely to stick. You should then also try to refill the worksheet from its blank form multiple times until you get to a point where you can fill it in without looking at this video or any of your notes. So it's all about how often you come back to material in order to get it to stick. If you found this useful, please click on the like button below. And if you haven't done so already, do subscribe for future videos.